We are coming to the conclusion here for our time into the book of Ecclesiastes. As we have mentioned last week in chapter 11, I simply titled that phrase, How Then Shall We Live? And looking at that chapter. And this morning we're going to conclude with just simply the title, How Then Shall We Die? That really is the focus of this chapter, is to remind us how things are coming to a conclusion and drawing to an end. And as much as we don't like to speak about these things, that is what is the text. And we'll be looking at that, of course, together. The text, the book itself, of course, has remained to us, I'm sure, an interesting book. I trust you've learned something along the way. I know I have. If nothing else, I've learned how to spell the book, which I previously always struggled with. I know that's a small thing and a silly thing to say, but it is true. But among other things, I have found the book to be, although it's probably the book that I've read the most in all of the Bible, the book to come alive to me. And I trust that you feel that as we've worked through it together, that you've been hearing the Lord speak to you, and you've been learning a few things of how to reshape our lives and direct our lives and live more according to His Word. The book begins, as you are aware, with the notion that without God, everything is vanity, emptiness, emptiness. As soon as you remove God, as soon as you look at life under the sun, instantaneously everything is pointless. God must remain the center of our lives in order for life to have meaning. You might remember that in chapter 3, he reminds us, he says it this way, also he has put eternity, that's God, he's put eternity into men's hearts, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. There's something in the human condition that although we can't find the answers, there's something in us that hungers for those answers. There's something in us that drives us to be looking for something deeper and something richer and something with meaning. We know that there has to be more to life than what we see. We see that in our behavior. It doesn't matter what your belief system is. Oftentimes you'll find people at a funeral and they'll be making comments along the lines of, he's in a better place or something like this. We know there's something deeper than just us. Here we are as a human race. I'm sure not any of us in this room specifically, but we are searching the universe for answers. We are literally looking for life somewhere else. Because what we find here hasn't satisfied us. It's as if we're saying this world doesn't have all the answers to all the meaning and all. It's got to be out there. We're looking and looking and hungering. And as a race, we know there's something more. And of course, the struggle is, and as this book has pointed out, this world is limited in all of its knowledge, and the truth that we need to find in Christ comes from outside of ourselves. It is something beyond this world. That's why we need Christ himself to come through our snow globe glass and bring us everything we needed, life indeed. So we know this limitation, and he points this out in the book. And throughout the book, he's been prodding us to look at the limitations and recognize that we won't find the answers here. The answers are only found in God, and he's pushing and prodding us to commit our way to what really matters. Remember chapter 5, he tells us, guard your steps when you come into the house of God. Draw near to listen and to offer the sacrifice of fools. Be careful when you come near into God's presence. Don't just fall into some religious mode and go through the motions. Pay attention to how important having God in the center of your life is. Remember in chapter 8, I think it's verse 2, keep the king's command because of God's oath to him. He tells us to not be hasty to leave his presence or take your stand against an evil cause. He reminds us how important it is to obey the king's commands, to know the king and submit to the king. Everything about this book is prodding us and pushing us to recognize that God must be the center of your life. That's the only place we find purpose and meaning. He reminds us of the foolishness of living without God. He who digs a pit will fall into it. He who quarries stones will fall back on them. The foolishness of living your own way ultimately brings your own disaster. And then last week he reminded us in chapter 11 that curious little phrase, cast your bread upon the water. If you want to live, live. Live for what counts and live for what is important, and that is God. And so we have chapter 12. He begins to finish off his words, to draw a conclusion. And he simply begins with these words in chapter 12, verse 1. Remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. Now, the phrase "in the days of your youth" doesn't necessarily mean, when you're 12 and 14 and 17 and whatever the case. It could be any time that you're young enough to do that remembering. I just want to pause for a minute and reflect on that word "remember," because that is key to this text. The word "remember" is not, he's just not calling us to just recollect a few things. Oh, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I remember God. Yeah, Like you're just asked to recall, your dentist appointment, or remember to pick up eggs on the way home from work. Like, just bring it back to mind. That's not what he's saying. There's a call in remember that goes much deeper than just the surface call of recollection. It's actually a remembrance that he's calling us to remember in such a way that it determines our action. Let me try to give you an illustration without distracting us too much. I'm going to take you back to some Mexican history. Antonio de Santa Anna, which I think is a great last name, Santa Anna. It sounds like Santa Claus's wife, but apparently it's not. Antonio de Santa Anna was a leader in Mexican history. He was I think a president around 11 times, different times. The country was in flux. And during one of the times of his reign, there was a dispute that took place in what is now modern-day Texas that used to be territory owned by Mexico, but maybe not. And it was a little bit under dispute. And some of the Texans decided to lay claim to this land. You're probably well familiar with this event because it literally changed what we now know as American history. There was a place called the Alamo. It was a mission that was established by Spanish missionaries, and it was a compound that Texans had come into and began to lay hold of and to claim this is Texas and not Mexico. Now, I'm certainly not a historian, and I may have some of my facts mixed around, but my point is clear, and I hope to be able to make it. The only place, by the way, the only part of the Alamo that's still standing is the church that you see in the upper picture. It was a large compound, or 6 or 7 acres or so. There were 200 Texans inside it, and the Mexican army came against these rebels, which sent 5,000 soldiers against 200 Texans, who were not soldiers, who had just picked up arms to defend off Mexico and to say, we are not going to live in Mexico. I don't need to tell you what happened because you know the story if you know any history at all. They got wiped out to the last person. Davy Crockett among them, other historic names were there. Everybody died. Actually, about a handful of people, I think 5, 6 people, actually literally escaped. So we do have, historians have eyewitness testimony to what took place. But it was a complete slaughter. There was no hope. And this area remained Mexican. 6 weeks later, thank you for hanging into my story. I think you know where we're headed here because you know the history. 6 weeks later, there was another conflict with the Mexican army. 6 weeks later at San Jacinta, the Mexican army pushed against the rebels again. But the rebels had already had one serious defeat, and they came up with a phrase. Remember the Alamo. And that's when it became famous. They called out during this battle, from what I understand, that was the battle cry. And it was a cry, and in those words, it simply carried everything that every soldier in that battle needed to remember. This is to the death. They will not let us live. This is for your freedom. Without this, you will never be free. Everything was carried in that little phrase, remember the Alamo. What happened then, we can't let that happen again. Those people died. It is exactly what's going to happen to us. Remember, is what he was saying, in such a way, don't just bring up some recollection, some memory. Oh yeah, I remember that. That was a nice day. It was sunny. We're not asking for some quaint little details. It's remember for the purpose of now instilling in you a proper response. Remember in such a way that you now behave accordingly. That is exactly the call in these opening words. Remember your Creator. This is not just some quaint recollection. It is recognizing that this is the position that you are in. That putting God in the position of Creator now snaps all your decisions in line, brings all of your life into focus. If God is the creator, that makes you the created. And by virtue of that relationship, you now owe your complete allegiance to him. Every breath you have comes from him. He made you. He sets the rules. Everything about him as creator affects the way we now make our decisions. Remember now, he says. Snap your life into focus. Now you're going to make some serious decisions about your life. Remember who you are in light of who he is. Remember your creator. In the days of your youth, he goes on to say, before the evil days come, and the years draw near, of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Now this is obviously heading again into this poetic language that we have known throughout the book, and he's beginning to express that and saying basically, watch out, because one day you're going to be so old, that you're just going to be tottering around, putting it in very blunt terms here. I'm not certainly hoping this on anyone, but this is the premise of where he's headed here. You'll be tottering around and you're going to be wondering, what is the point of my existence? I'm now not good for anything. All I do is eat and sleep and get up and eat, and somebody else changes me and whatever's going on in my situation. He's saying to us, remember your creator. Don't put this off in getting your life in order. Remember your creator before the days of evil come, when you do not have the cognitive ability to put two sentences together. Whew, that was ironic. Two thoughts together and be able to make something make sense. Be careful. I was some time ago visiting, some time ago now, he was a friend of the mission that we worked with. He was actually worked for the mission. He was 104 years old. Fantastically godly man. Enormous man of God in so many ways. The only malady that he had, so totally clear-headed. He remembered, I saw him once, and then about 2 years later, I met him again, and he said, oh, you have different glasses. I'm not even kidding you. He was the sharpest man for his age. The only issue was his hearing was gone, and that was obviously a struggle. Went and visited him, just an amazing man, yelling back and forth and having a nice time together. And basically what he said to me was, for all that he'd done for the Lord, for all that he had, the years and years that he'd lived, he had reached a point where he was actually, he was praying, he was asking God, why am I still here? You can only live so long, my experience talking to him, when suddenly there's this tipping point where it just doesn't make sense anymore. And for whatever reason, by God's grace, your heart is still beating and your lungs are still filling up with air, but you feel no good for anything. That's what he's saying. Before the sun and the light and the moon and the stars are darkened, and the clouds return after the rain. You notice the imagery. The sun, the greatest light. Then the moon, the lesser light. And the stars, the even lesser light. Do you see the dimming of things going on? The sun, the moon, the stars, getting darker and dimmer and dimmer. It's just an image. Life ebbing away. And the clouds return after the rain. It's just an image. Clouds come, they do what they've done, and then they're gone because what they were is just water. And now that water is down on the earth. Your life just disappears. And then what happens? Someone else comes along. Here comes some more clouds. No evidence that you were here now. You're gone. It's just an imagery. Very picturesque, because it's nice to talk about these things in flowery language, because no one likes to just bluntly say, one day you're going to die. So it's poetic language. And he's sharpening our focus. Remember your creator. Pay attention to getting your life in order, because this is the end of everybody, and it's not something we generally think about. Verse 3, in the day when the keepers of the house tremble, he begins to now use a picture, a metaphor. He begins a picture of a house, of a building, and he uses this picture to describe what old age looks like. What it looks like for you and I as we begin to experience this kind of decay of our house, of who we are. When the days of the keepers of the house tremble. What are the keepers of the house? Well, it's your hands, your arms. Keeps you combed, keeps you clean, keeps you fed, keeps you protected. The keepers of your house tremble. I'm not certainly trying to speak about anybody with a tremble in their hand, but I do know that, as I understand, I can remember my grandmother drinking a cup of tea, and you would always wear a raincoat and step 3 feet back. I mean, no disrespect, it was just that way. She reached the point, English as she was, she always had to have a cup of tea, but it was kind of dangerous. Hot tea in the hands of a woman who could barely hold a teacup with her pinky in the air, because that was important. The keepers of the house tremble. The strong men are bent. What are the strong men? What holds the house up? It's your legs. Strong men are starting to bend, and the grinders cease. What are the grinders? Kind of obvious, isn't it? The grinders cease because they're few. Now, this is the day before dentures and that kind of thing, but, you can't now, you're not, those days when you're not eating an ear of corn anymore. Everything's soup and pureed and whatever the case, because they are few. And those who look through the windows are dimmed. What are the windows? Those are your eyes. Now, you're not quite so, where did everybody go? You're not quite so clear anymore. And I remember, when I was a kid, I remember when my father got glasses, and I thought, he must be going to die soon. But I remember when I got glasses, and I thought, life is only half over. This is how it happens. The windows, looking through the windows, they're starting to dim. There's a lot of good reasons to have good eyesight. Not the least of which is to be careful when you go to the barber. Never go to a blind barber. That's just a heads up. The doors on the street are shut. What is that talking about? What do doors do? They open up and they let things in. The outside world comes in. What are we talking about? We're talking about our ears. The doors in the street are shut. When the sound, here's an expression, explanation of it. When the sound of grinding is low. I can't hear the mill. I can't hear things going on anymore. The television is louder than it ever was. And what, ironically, you rise at the sound of a bird. Your timing is all off now. You're up at 4:30 in the morning, and so you're going to bed at 8 o'clock at night, and whatever else is going on. And some of you are already laughing because that's become normal for you, even as it is. You're aging. Remember your Creator in the days of your youth, as before everything starts to fade, because this is how it is. The daughters of song are brought low. You can't hear the music that's going on anymore. Sometimes you don't want to hear the music that's going on anymore. They're also afraid of what is high. I can't get up on that step ladder. I never, climb. Oh, no, fall, break a hip, and whatever's going on. And everything's a terror. There's terrors in the way. I can't go outside. There's ice. There's people, all those kids on skateboards, and nobody pays attention, and you're running around, and sit here. There's terrors in the way. The almond tree blossoms. There's a phrase that doesn't quite connect with our Canadian culture, but an almond tree blossoms white. Some of you have blossomed well. From a distance, you see an almond tree, and it just looks like a nice white head of hair. Some of you look like your leaves fell off a few years ago. But that's all that is. The almond tree has blossomed. It's a picture of what happens to the human body. The grasshopper, which is snapping and jumping, and a virile creature that we just, hops and hips and goes, and back in the day. And now you're just saying on, and you're just doing what you can do, The grasshopper just drags himself along. Have you seen insects at the end of the season? You ever seen a wasp or a bee just walking along on your deck, waiting to die? That's the image here. What used to be have movement, and desire fails. Want to go to the park, Grandpa? I don't want to sit here. No, it's fine. Want some soup, Grandpa? I don't care. Nothing matters anymore. All those things that all your hobbies, all the excitement, because man, why? Because man is going to his eternal home and mourners go about the street. When I first met my wife, she had more grandparents than you can count on your hands. That's what it felt like. I think she had 5 or 6 grandparents. I can't remember now. I met all the ones that were living at the time, greats and great-greats, and it was an insane family. I don't even have parents, and she had crazy opposites. I met her great-grandmother, who was 100 years old, who was lying in a nursing home, and we went to visit her. We got engaged, and she wanted to introduce me to the family, and she's 100 years old, and she sits up and looks at me, and she says, "So, Sonny, you want to marry my great-granddaughter?" I said, "Well, yeah." I was feeling all sheepish and awkward, like, "Oh, yeah, I guess so. If you don't mind." She says, "Come here. I want to tell you something." Oh, now I'm really scared. I don't even know this woman, but she just seems a little on the cranky side, and I step up beside her bed, and I kind of look at her, and she says, "Let me just tell you one thing. The first 100 years are the hardest." True story. He carries on, chapter 6, verse 6. He has this picture of death. This picture of death that is just poetic. Before the silver cord is snapped or the golden bowl is broken. He's almost for sure thinking of a lamp that would have been hanging. A bowl that would have been full of oil, that would have been alight, and it would have been hanging by, in this case, a silver cord. It's not necessarily exactly how it would have been done, but he's making imagery of the thing. And the silver cord is snapped. That's the word there. All at once, this perfect, and you notice it's precious metals that he's talking about, this functional item is snapped. And the golden bowl, full of oil, aflame, drops to the marble floor, spills everything everywhere, the flame goes out, the bowl is mangled, and the whole thing is destroyed in an instant. And what was functional and precious and good is gone. Remember your Creator before the silver cord is snapped or the golden bowl is broken, and then he puts a juxtaposition of concepts beside that, or the picture. He now goes from precious metals to some clay pot that's just common everyday use. On the one hand, your life is precious and unique and important, and the other hand, you're just one of a million. You're just a common, ordinary commoner. And the picture is broken, shattered at the fountain. Picture of somebody coming to the well, gathering up some water, tripping, knocking it off, whatever the case. It lands down in the dirt and it bursts into 1,000 shards. Water spills everywhere. All the life-giving water is gone and it's no longer functional. The dust returns to the earth as it was, and the spirit returns to God who gave it. It's death. Vanity of vanities, says the preacher. All is vanity. Oh, I missed a phrase here, sorry. Or the wheel broken at the cistern. I missed this phrase. That, of course, is just an obvious thing. A cistern is a well. The wheel, just obviously you know what that does. If any of you are old enough to even have had to use one of those, cranks up, cranks down, and the whole thing is falling apart. You used to be functional, didn't you? You used to have a life, and you used to actually do something in society, and you actually were good as a parent, and life just comes to a place where the wheel breaks at the well. And suddenly the whole thing that once used to work dilapidates, dysfunction, just because of the way it is. And the dust returns to the earth as it was, the spirit returns to God who gave it. So we remember, is what he says. Remember your Creator while you're young enough, while you have the capacity to order your life after what matters. Besides being wise, he says in verse 9, the preacher also taught people knowledge, weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs with great care. The preacher sought to find words of delight, and uprightly he wrote words of truth. Now, on the surface, this sounds like he's blowing his own horn, Look at me, look what I did. I wrote some smart things. I'm really wise. That's not what he's going on here. He's giving you his credentials. He's saying to you, what I have told you in this book of getting your life in order, of living your life for what counts, of spending your time on what really matters, all that I have expressed to you of the emptiness of life without God at the center of it, I'm not just making this up. I'm not just blowing ideas at you. This is something that I have credential to talk about. And what I am writing to you is truth, is what he is saying. I have taken great care to seek this out and to put these words in order. Weighing and studying and arranging many proverbs. He's not only talking about the Proverbs here, but of course the book of Proverbs that he has also written. The words of the wise, he goes on to say. These words that I've written, these words that have encouraged you to try and order your life accordingly are like goads. Do you know what a goad is? We don't necessarily use goads, but a goad is a very common instrument in areas of the world where they use animals to plow. A goad is a long stick with a point on the end. That's all it is. And you, as the plower, if your animal is slow, you take that goad and he gets the point. Move on, get going, move along, go a little faster. You goad, you push, you poke, you prick right at where it counts. That's what he's saying. The words that I've given to you have been like goads. I have poked you in places where you have never thought of going before. I have pushed your mind into spots that you've never really started to consider. What does life look like if God doesn't exist? Why does the universe look like it's all disordered and we're just going from season to season? These have been goads. He's telling us it is better to go to the house of mourning than to go to a house of feasting. Who thinks like that? These are goads. They're pushing you into a new direction. They're prodding you to think about something you've never thought about, to aim you to one single goal. Find those nails. The words of the wise are like goads. He's been goading us the whole way through, poking us, pushing us, that we would find those nails. You know what nails are? You take two loose objects and you fasten them together, they become one. This is the idea of tent pegs that would go deep down into the earth and secure it so whatever wind comes, whatever storm blows, it's firmly fastened together so that your life, in all the nonsense and chaos of ideas, the ideas of how to live and what to do and what's right and what's wrong, your heart is fastened. It is nailed to what really counts. You are nailed to the truth. You are nailed deep so that no matter what goes on, your life is ordered. You've got a plan. You've got a purpose. You know what you're doing with your life, with your finances, with your time, with your gifts. I have a reason. I have a goal. I have an aim. I know what I'm doing. All these words are like goads and nails for the purpose of bringing us to order our lives for what really counts, that we might remember, for the purpose of ordering our lives accordingly, remember the Creator while we still have the cognitive ability to make choices that count. These sayings are given by one shepherd, he says. It's an admission that this book is inspired. It certainly has led us to believe so. My son, be aware of anything beyond these, he's trying to say. Everything you need to know to order your life, I've given you in this book. Of making of many books, there is no end. There will always be another how-to book. There will always be another idea. But I'm telling you, much studying is weariness to the flesh. You don't need those books. What you need is what I've given you in this book, the goads and the nails. That's all you need. And here is the end of the matter. Some people summarize and say, what is the book of Ecclesiastes about? They say, oh, it's all about vanity. Everything's vanity. Really? Is that what the book's about? Then why is it that when he gets to the end of his book and he says, the end of the matter, he excludes the words, vanity of vanities. Here is the conclusion. The conclusion has nothing to do with the fact that life is vanity. That was the point that he was drawing us to draw out the greater point. Here's the point of the entire book, if you want to understand Ecclesiastes. It is summarized right here. The end of the matter. Our final words, people. All has been heard. Here's what I'm saying to you. Here's the point of the book. Here's the point of where I've been prodding you. Here's where the goads have been pushing you. Here are the nails that you need to fasten down with. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the whole duty of man. Fearing God is not a fear that you rise up on a Halloween night when some scarecrow jumps out of the corn maze and scares the heebie-jeebies out of you. That's not the fear that we're talking about. This is not the fear that you cower because your dad's grabbed the belt and he's a little bit off center with regards to punishment. It's not that fear. This is a fear that respects. It's a fear that draws you in line. It's a fear that you realize who you are before the Creator. That you have no rights, that you have no ability to decide what's right or wrong. You need to get in obedience to Him. He is in charge and you are not. And your life needs to come in submission in every way to the one who is in charge of all things. It's just a sensible respect for who you are, who He is, and who you're not. Fear God and keep His commandments. For God, last verse of this entire book, for God will bring every deed into judgment with every secret thing, whether good or evil. Whew. That isn't a smack in the face. There's a big happy reminder. Go ahead, live your life, but know this, that your life is on entirely, every moment of your life is on hidden camera, if you will. It has been captured on video, if you want to put it that way. The omnipotent, all-knowing, all-powerful God who sees all and knows all has watched your entire life. Everything you've done, every motive that you've got, every reason for what you do, it is captured before Him and laid bare. There is no secret. And everything in everybody's heart will one day be laid bare before the judge who will hold us accountable for how we live our lives according to what we know. So get your life in order. Set your priorities on what counts. Bring your life into focus. Remember the Creator while you still have the cognitive ability to focus on what really matters, because this is the end of all things. Fear God, keep His commandments, and know this, that God will bring every deed into judgment, whether good, bad, secret, whatever the case, it will all be known. And thus we have the book of Ecclesiastes. In my feeble effort to try and bring this to you, I think some of the messages I look back are pretty crummy, and I trust God, use them, whatever. But I know from my own heart, I have felt the Lord stir me through the book. And I know from some of what you have said, you have appreciated and felt the Lord prodding you and pushing you in this book. We're going to close this series in a way that we've not done before. We're just going to close in prayer, in silence. I'm going to give you an opportunity to respond to what God has been saying to you through this book. Now this morning, I know it's late, our minds have a hard time focusing, but I ask you to seriously consider, what has God been saying to you in this book? What are the things that you have been drawing near to listen, but not to put into action? What parts of your life are not really in line with what really counts? What parts of your life are you lazy about? You're really not that careful that your money is God's money, or your time is God's time, or your life is really your life, and you really are addicted to foolishness. I mean, you couldn't live without your soap opera. You wouldn't dream of going without your novels or whatever you're captivated by. And your time has truly been captured by something that at the end of the day means nothing. And if there's anything that this book has been calling us to, it is getting your life in order for what really counts and putting your life in order for what really matters. Have you been doing that? Have you ever committed your way again to the Lord? I just want you to do that this morning if you feel that's in your heart. Just commit those areas of your life that God has been speaking to you about. Areas of your heart that you're lazy about. Commit yourself to God. Ask Him to take your life and let it be consecrated, Lord, to Thee. Use who I am, my hands, my time, my feet. Use me to the glory of God. Can we just pray? Let's bow together. Father, in the simplicity of what we've been hearing, even again this morning, we ask your Spirit would meet with us. We need to be committed to you and to be surrendered to you. We need, Father, to walk in such a way that we live our lives according to your word. Father, you know, even in this frail effort to try and communicate something of yourself, how dependent we are on your Spirit to work among us and work through us. And I just pray you would come even today and do what you want to do in our midst as you find humble hearts that are willing to submit and to trust you afresh.